Vanessa Parker was 52 years old, wealthy, and living a life of luxury. On the outside, she seemed to have everything she could want: money, status, and beauty. But there was something else. She craved the attention of a much younger man. Vanessa's obsession with Ryan Davis, a 27-year-old struggling to make his own way in life, would soon lead to tragedy. Ryan had met Vanessa through mutual friends. At first, it was just a casual fling, something Ryan thought would never get serious. But Vanessa fell hard, quickly turning what Ryan thought was a fun relationship into something darker. She showered him with expensive gifts, paid his bills, and took him on trips, always keeping him close. But when Ryan started pulling away, Vanessa couldn't handle it. Her obsession grew stronger, and she became desperate to keep Ryan in her life, no matter the cost. The closer Ryan got to escaping the relationship, the more dangerous Vanessa became. Friends noticed that something wasn't right. Vanessa's behavior grew more erratic, and her jealousy turned into something far more sinister. But no one could have predicted just how far she would go to hold on to the man she couldn't live without. What started as an affair of power and control would end in the most shocking way possible, with a murder. Vanessa's obsession would spiral into a deadly confrontation, leaving everyone around them stunned by how a relationship built on money and control turned so violent. Vanessa Parker had lived a life of wealth and luxury for most of her years. At 52, she enjoyed the finer things in life: the expensive dinners, luxury vacations, and designer clothes. But what Vanessa craved more than anything was the attention and love of someone younger, someone she could control. That's when Ryan Davis entered her life. At 27, Ryan was attractive, confident, and most importantly for Vanessa, easy to manipulate. They met through mutual friends at an upscale party, and Vanessa quickly became infatuated with him. Ryan, on the other hand, was living a much different life. He was struggling to make ends meet, juggling a few odd jobs while trying to figure out what he wanted from life. To him, Vanessa seemed like a fun distraction at first. She was older, wealthy, and offered him an escape from his everyday struggles. He accepted her attention, enjoying the gifts and luxury trips that she lavished upon him, but what started as a casual fling soon became something far more sinister. Vanessa's obsession with Ryan grew quickly. She wanted to keep him close, to make sure that he was always available to her. She paid for everything: his rent, his bills, even his car. Ryan began to feel like he was being bought, but he wasn't ready to walk away from the lifestyle Vanessa provided. He knew he didn't love her, but he played along, thinking he could control the situation. He was wrong. As the months passed, Vanessa's grip on Ryan tightened. She became increasingly possessive, always needing to know where he was and who he was with. She began showing up at his apartment unannounced, calling him constantly and expecting him to drop everything to be with her. Ryan's friends noticed the change in his life, but he brushed it off, saying it was just a temporary situation. Deep down, though, Ryan started feeling trapped, realizing that Vanessa's affection wasn't love, it was control. Vanessa's close friend, Tanya Martin, saw the signs early on. She had known Vanessa for years and had seen her go through relationships before. But this time, something was different. Vanessa wasn't just infatuated, she was obsessed. Tanya tried to talk to Vanessa, warning her that her behavior was becoming unhealthy, but Vanessa didn't want to hear it. In her mind, Ryan was hers, and she would do whatever it took to keep him by her side. Ryan's life was slowly becoming more suffocating. He tried distancing himself from Vanessa, making excuses about work or needing time with his friends. But every time he pulled away, Vanessa pulled him back in with more gifts or promises of bigger things. She would cry, telling him that she needed him and that no one else understood her like he did. Ryan, feeling guilty, would give in every time, unable to break free from the web Vanessa had spun around him. But as Vanessa's obsession grew, so did her jealousy. Ryan was young and attractive, and Vanessa became paranoid that he was seeing other women behind her back. She started accusing him of cheating, demanding to know where he had been every time they weren't together. Ryan denied it, frustrated by her constant need for control. He began to realize that this relationship was more than he had bargained for, and he started to fear what Vanessa might do if he tried to leave. One night, Ryan decided to end things. He had spent months trapped in this relationship, feeling more like a possession than a person, and he couldn't take it anymore. He met with Vanessa at her lavish home, planning to tell her that it was over. But Vanessa wasn't ready to let him go. She begged him to stay, promising to give him anything he wanted. When Ryan refused, Vanessa's mood shifted. The calm, composed woman he had known was gone, replaced by someone desperate and unhinged. Ryan left Vanessa's house that night, but the damage had already been done. Vanessa's obsession had turned into something much darker, and she wasn't about to let Ryan walk out of her life without a fight. What neither of them knew at the time was that this toxic relationship was heading toward a tragic and violent end. This was only the beginning of Vanessa's obsession. As Ryan tried to break free, Vanessa's actions became more erratic and dangerous, setting the stage for a deadly confrontation that no one could have predicted. After Ryan left Vanessa's house that night, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had finally told her he wanted out. But what Ryan didn't know was that Vanessa wasn't going to let him go so easily. The end of their relationship only marked the beginning of Vanessa's downward spiral. Her obsession with Ryan grew stronger, and her jealousy turned into something far more dangerous. Vanessa spent the next few days in denial. She refused to believe that Ryan had truly left her. She told herself that he was just angry and needed time to cool down. But as the days turned into weeks and Ryan stopped responding to her calls and messages, reality began to set in. Vanessa couldn't bear the thought of him moving on without her. She started driving by his apartment, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. When that didn't work, she began showing up at places she knew he frequented, like the gym or his favorite coffee shop. Each time, she hoped Ryan would see her and realize he had made a mistake. But he never did. As Ryan tried to rebuild his life without Vanessa, he began to notice her presence everywhere. At first he thought it was a coincidence, maybe they were just running into each other by accident. But when it kept happening, Ryan realized that Vanessa wasn't letting go. She would sit in her car outside his apartment for hours, waiting for him to come home. She would show up at restaurants when he was out with friends, always staying just far enough away to avoid a confrontation, but close enough to remind him that she was still there. Ryan's friends, including his close buddy Mark Thompson, started to worry. They had noticed Vanessa's strange behavior and the toll it was taking on Ryan. He wasn't sleeping well, constantly looking over his shoulder, afraid that Vanessa might be lurking nearby. Mark urged him to go to the police, but Ryan hesitated. He didn't want to escalate things, and part of him still felt guilty for the way things had ended with Vanessa. But as Vanessa's actions grew more erratic, Ryan began to fear for his safety. Vanessa, meanwhile, was losing control. Her once well-maintained image began to slip. She stopped going to social events and withdrew from her circle of friends, including Tanya Martin, who had grown increasingly concerned about her. Vanessa spent most of her days alone in her large, empty house, consumed by thoughts of Ryan. She couldn't understand why he had left her, why he couldn't see that they were meant to be together. She started drinking more, often staying up late at night, scrolling through old photos of them on her phone, reliving the moments when things were good. The more Vanessa obsessed over Ryan, the more desperate she became. She started following him even more closely, determined to find out if he was seeing someone else. One night, while sitting outside Ryan's apartment, Vanessa saw him with another woman. They were laughing, walking side by side, and it was clear to Vanessa that Ryan had moved on. The sight of him with someone else filled her with rage. In her mind, Ryan had betrayed her. She felt humiliated and abandoned, and she couldn't stand the idea of him being happy with someone else while she was left alone. That night marked a turning point for Vanessa. The jealousy and obsession that had been building for months finally reached a breaking point. She was no longer content to simply watch Ryan from a distance. She wanted him back, and if she couldn't have him, no one else would. Vanessa began planning her next move, fueled by a mix of anger, heartbreak, and desperation. As Vanessa's behavior became more alarming, Ryan grew increasingly paranoid. He knew she was watching him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. He tried to distance himself even more, avoiding places where he thought she might be, and telling his new girlfriend, Lauren, about the situation. Lauren was supportive, but she too became nervous, realizing that Vanessa's obsession was more serious than either of them had initially thought. Ryan finally decided it was time to take action. He went to the police and filed a report, explaining Vanessa's stalking behavior and his fear that she might become violent. The police took his statement, but without any concrete evidence of a threat, there was little they could do. They advised him to keep a record of any further incidents and to contact them if Vanessa's behavior escalated. Feeling frustrated and helpless, Ryan hoped that his report would at least scare Vanessa off, but it had the opposite effect. When Vanessa found out that Ryan had gone to the police, her obsession only intensified. She felt betrayed once again, and this time she was determined to make him pay. In Vanessa's mind, Ryan had turned her into the villain, and she was ready to show him just how far she was willing to go. In the days leading up to the tragedy, Vanessa's actions became even more erratic. She sent Ryan dozens of messages, alternating between begging him to come back to her and accusing him of ruining her life. Ryan tried to ignore her, but the constant barrage of messages and her unpredictable behavior made it impossible for him to feel safe. He started staying with friends, too afraid to be alone in his own apartment. Vanessa, on the other hand, was growing more isolated. She stopped answering calls from Tanya and other friends who had been trying to check on her. Tanya, sensing that something was seriously wrong, went to Vanessa's house to talk to her, but Vanessa refused to answer the door. Tanya was left standing outside, worried and confused, not realizing just how dangerous the situation had become. Vanessa was now in complete turmoil. Her obsession with Ryan had taken over every aspect of her life, and she was consumed by the thought of getting him back or destroying him in the process. She was no longer thinking clearly, driven by a toxic mix of anger, jealousy, and heartbreak. The stage was set for the tragic and violent confrontation that was about to unfold, one that would leave both their lives changed forever. As Vanessa's obsession deepened, she became more unpredictable. Her mind was consumed by thoughts of Ryan and how he had abandoned her for another woman. She could no longer think rationally, and her anger was bubbling just beneath the surface. The sight of him with Lauren, his new girlfriend, had sent Vanessa into a downward spiral. She believed that Ryan had betrayed her, and she was determined to make him pay. Ryan, meanwhile, was doing everything he could to distance himself from Vanessa. He changed his routine, stopped going to his usual hangouts, and even stayed with friends to avoid being alone. But no matter what he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa was watching him. He felt trapped, knowing that her obsession was only growing more intense. Lauren tried to support him, but she too was becoming increasingly scared of what Vanessa might do. One night, Ryan received another flood of messages from Vanessa. These messages were different from before. They were more aggressive, filled with anger and accusations. Ryan tried to ignore them, but the sheer number of messages made it impossible to relax. He told Lauren about the messages, and they decided it was time to leave town for a while. Ryan had already filed a police report, but nothing had changed. The thought of leaving gave him a small sense of relief, as if escaping Vanessa's reach might finally give him some peace. Vanessa, however, was watching. She knew Ryan was planning to leave, and she couldn't allow that to happen. In her mind, Ryan belonged to her, and no one else could have him. That night, she made a decision. She was going to confront Ryan one last time. And this time, she wasn't going to let him walk away. She felt that if she couldn't have him, no one could. Vanessa's obsession had taken full control, and she was prepared to do whatever it took to make sure Ryan couldn't escape her grasp. On the night of the confrontation, Ryan and Lauren were at his apartment, packing up their things to leave the next morning. Ryan was nervous, but he was trying to stay calm. He had seen Vanessa's car parked outside earlier that evening, but she hadn't made any attempt to come inside. Ryan hoped that she had finally given up and that the situation would soon be behind him. But Vanessa had other plans. As Ryan and Lauren finished packing, there was a loud knock on the door. Both of them froze. Ryan's heart raced as he approached the door, knowing exactly who it was. He hesitated for a moment, unsure whether he should answer. But before he could make a decision, the door burst open. Vanessa stood in the doorway, her face twisted with anger. She had followed Ryan's every move, and now, here she was, standing in his apartment, ready to confront him for the final time. Lauren screamed as Vanessa pushed her way inside. Ryan tried to calm the situation, telling Vanessa to leave, but she wasn't listening. Vanessa was beyond reason, her mind consumed by jealousy and betrayal. She was holding a knife, and the sight of it made Ryan's stomach drop. He had feared something like this might happen, but now that it was real, he wasn't sure what to do. Vanessa lunged at Ryan, screaming that he had ruined her life. She accused him of leaving her for someone else, of abandoning her when she had given him everything. Ryan tried to back away, but Vanessa was relentless. Lauren grabbed her phone to call the police, but in the chaos, Vanessa turned her attention to Lauren. She saw her as the reason Ryan had left, the woman who had taken everything from her. Vanessa lunged again, this time toward Lauren. Ryan stepped in, trying to protect Lauren, but Vanessa's rage was uncontrollable. She slashed at Ryan with the knife, her movements wild and erratic. In that moment, Vanessa wasn't thinking about anything but her own pain, her own anger. She had lost control completely. Ryan fell to the floor, bleeding, as Vanessa stood over him, her breath heavy, her eyes filled with a strange mix of triumph and despair. Lauren, terrified, managed to run out of the apartment and call the police. She screamed for help, but by the time officers arrived, it was too late. Ryan was dead, lying in a pool of blood on the floor of his own apartment. Vanessa, still standing over his body, didn't try to run. She had done what she had come to do, and now the weight of her actions seemed to settle in. The obsession that had driven her to this point was gone, replaced by a cold, empty realization of what she had done. The police arrested Vanessa without resistance. She was calm, almost detached, as they led her away in handcuffs. Ryan's lifeless body remained on the floor, a tragic end to what had once been a casual relationship. Lauren, shaken and traumatized, could barely speak as she watched the scene unfold. The confrontation between Vanessa and Ryan had ended in the worst possible way. What had started as an obsessive infatuation had spiraled into a violent act of jealousy and possession. Vanessa's inability to let go of Ryan had cost him his life, and now she would have to face the consequences of her actions. The tragedy left a deep scar on everyone involved, and the community was left in shock, struggling to understand how something like this could have happened. The investigation into Ryan's murder would soon reveal the extent of Vanessa's obsession and the warning signs that had been missed along the way. But for now, the damage was done. Ryan was gone, and Vanessa's life was in ruins. It was a devastating end to a story of love turned deadly, where one woman's obsession had led to a senseless act of violence. The murder of Ryan Davis shocked everyone who knew him. A young man with his whole life ahead of him had been taken in a moment of uncontrolled rage, leaving behind friends, family, and a devastated girlfriend, Lauren. The crime scene, a small apartment that once held his hopes for a new beginning, was now filled with silence. The police quickly secured the area, and detectives began to piece together the events leading up to Ryan's tragic death. Vanessa Parker, the woman responsible for the murder, was immediately taken into custody. She offered no resistance when the police arrived and remained silent as they questioned her about what had happened. For the officers, it was a chilling encounter. Vanessa, who had once been a successful, wealthy woman, now sat in the back of a police car, broken and defeated. The obsession that had consumed her for months had finally reached its deadly conclusion, and she seemed detached from the gravity of what she had done. Detective Sarah Collins was assigned to lead the investigation. With years of experience handling violent crimes, she was familiar with cases driven by jealousy and obsession. But this one stood out. As she reviewed the details of Vanessa and Ryan's relationship, it became clear that Vanessa had been spiraling out of control for months. Her obsessive behavior, the stalking, the threats it all pointed to an unstable woman who couldn't accept rejection. Detective Collins began to piece together the timeline, starting with the moment Vanessa had learned about Ryan's new relationship with Lauren. The investigation moved quickly. Witnesses, including neighbors and friends of Ryan, were interviewed, and it became clear that Vanessa's fixation on Ryan had been well known to those around him. Mark Thompson, Ryan's closest friend, described how Vanessa would appear at random places, always watching, always lurking. He told the detectives about Ryan's growing fear and how they had planned to leave town in hopes of escaping her relentless stalking. Lauren also gave her account of that final night, how Vanessa had broken into the apartment and attacked Ryan in a fit of rage. Her statement, though painful to recall, helped the police build their case against Vanessa. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear just how much control Vanessa had tried to exert over Ryan's life. Bank records showed that Vanessa had been financially supporting Ryan for months, paying his rent, bills, and even sending him large sums of money. Friends of Vanessa, like Tanya Martin, revealed that she had been deeply insecure about her age and her relationship with Ryan. She had believed that her wealth and power would be enough to keep him close, but when he started pulling away, her insecurity turned into something much darker. The evidence against Vanessa was overwhelming. Security footage from the building showed her arriving at Ryan's apartment shortly before the murder. The messages she had sent to Ryan in the days leading up to the crime, full of anger and desperation, painted a clear picture of her state of mind. The knife used in the attack was found at the scene, and Vanessa's fingerprints were all over it. There was no question about who had committed the murder. For Ryan's family and friends, the weeks following his death were a blur of grief and confusion. His parents, who lived in another state, were devastated by the news. They had known little about Vanessa or the intensity of her obsession with their son. They flew in for the funeral, which was attended by dozens of Ryan's friends and loved ones. The sadness in the room was palpable as everyone struggled to come to terms with the fact that Ryan's life had been cut short in such a violent and senseless way. Lauren, still in shock from what had happened, tried to keep herself together, but the trauma of that night weighed heavily on her. She couldn't stop replaying the moment Vanessa had burst through the door, the look of rage in her eyes, and the sound of Ryan's voice as he tried to protect her. It would be months before Lauren could even begin to heal from the horror she had witnessed, and the guilt she felt for surviving while Ryan had not. Meanwhile, Vanessa remained in custody, awaiting trial. Her lawyers tried to argue that she had acted in a moment of temporary insanity, driven by her emotional instability and jealousy. They claimed that Vanessa had never intended to kill Ryan, but that her actions were the result of a mental breakdown. However, the prosecution had a different view. They argued that Vanessa's actions had been premeditated, that her obsession with Ryan had driven her to plan the attack when she realized he was moving on with someone else. They pointed to the months of stalking, the controlling behavior, and the threats as clear evidence that Vanessa had been leading up to this moment all along. As the trial approached, the media caught wind of the case. Reporters began to swarm the courthouse, drawn to the dramatic nature of the crime. The story of a wealthy older woman who had become so obsessed with a younger man that she had taken his life was too sensational to ignore. News outlets ran stories about Vanessa's background, her luxurious lifestyle, and how it had all unraveled when her relationship with Ryan began to crumble. The public was captivated, and the case became a focal point in discussions about jealousy, obsession, and the dangers of unchecked emotional instability. Detective Collins continued to work behind the scenes, gathering all the evidence needed to ensure that justice would be served for Ryan. She knew that this case was about more than just one woman's obsession. It was a story of how dangerous it could be when control, jealousy, and desperation took over someone's life. Vanessa's inability to let go of Ryan had led to a brutal murder, and now the justice system would have to decide her fate. The stage was set for a trial that would not only bring closure to Ryan's loved ones, but also reveal the full extent of Vanessa's obsession. The community, still reeling from the shock of the crime, waited anxiously to see how it would all unfold. Vanessa Parker's trial began 6 months after the murder of Ryan Davis. By the time it started, the case had already gained significant media attention. The story of a wealthy older woman consumed by jealousy, leading to a tragic murder, captivated the public. As Vanessa sat in the courtroom, the once glamorous woman looked tired and defeated. Her obsession had destroyed everything she had built, and now her fate rested in the hands of the justice system. The prosecution laid out the events of the night of Ryan's death in painful detail. They showed how Vanessa's obsession had grown over time, from controlling his finances to stalking him and finally attacking him in a jealous rage. They presented the evidence messages Vanessa had sent Ryan in the days leading up to the murder, the security footage from outside his apartment, and the knife she used to kill him. Each piece painted a clear picture of a woman who had spiraled out of control. Ryan's friends, including Mark Thompson, testified about Vanessa's behavior before the murder. Mark told the court how Ryan had become increasingly fearful of Vanessa and how they had planned to leave town to escape her. His testimony was crucial in showing that Ryan had tried to distance himself, but Vanessa had refused to let him go. Lauren, Ryan's girlfriend, also took the stand. She recounted the events of that horrifying night, how Vanessa had burst into the apartment and attacked Ryan. Her voice shook as she described the final moments of Ryan's life, a scene that haunted everyone in the courtroom. The defense, meanwhile, argued that Vanessa had acted out of temporary insanity. Her lawyers claimed that she had suffered a mental breakdown, triggered by her intense emotional attachment to Ryan. They brought in a psychologist who testified that Vanessa's obsessive behavior was a sign of deep emotional instability, and that she had lost control in a moment of desperation. They argued that while she had committed the murder, she hadn't planned it, and that her mental state should be taken into account when deciding her punishment. However, the prosecution countered by highlighting the months of stalking, manipulation, and control leading up to the murder. They argued that Vanessa's actions were not the result of a sudden mental breakdown, but rather a calculated response to losing the control she had over Ryan. They pointed to the fact that she had arrived at his apartment armed with a knife, and that her behavior in the days before the murder showed clear signs of premeditation. The jury listened intently as both sides presented their case. The evidence was overwhelming, and it was clear to most observers that Vanessa's obsession had crossed a line long before the night of the murder. She had spent months trying to keep Ryan under her control, and when he finally broke free, her jealousy and rage had taken over. The jury deliberated for several hours, but in the end, they returned with a guilty verdict. Vanessa was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the sentence, and Vanessa showed little emotion. The reality of what she had done seemed to settle over her as she was led away in handcuffs. For Ryan's family and friends, the verdict brought some closure, but it could never undo the damage that had been done. A young man had lost his life, and no amount of justice could bring him back. After the trial, Ryan's loved ones tried to rebuild their lives. His parents returned to their home, heartbroken over the loss of their son. Lauren struggled with the trauma of what she had witnessed, but over time she began to heal. She moved out of the apartment where the murder had taken place, unable to live in a space filled with so many painful memories. Mark and other friends organized a memorial in Ryan's honor, gathering to remember the good times they had shared with him before his life was cut short. Vanessa's story, meanwhile, became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked obsession and control. The media continued to report on the case, dissecting the psychological factors that had led Vanessa to murder. Her once glamorous life had crumbled, and now she would spend the rest of her days in prison, haunted by the choices she had made. The trial raised important questions about mental health, control, and the warning signs of dangerous behavior, sparking conversations about how such tragedies could be prevented in the future. Detective Sarah Collins, who had led the investigation, reflected on the case in the months that followed. She had seen many crimes of passion, but this one stood out. The signs had been there for so long, yet nothing had been done until it was too late. She couldn't help but wonder if the tragedy could have been prevented if someone had intervened earlier, if Ryan had taken Vanessa's obsession more seriously from the start. But those questions would remain unanswered. The town slowly returned to normal after the trial, but the memory of Ryan's death lingered. People talked about how such a thing could have happened in their community, and many became more aware of the dangers of controlling relationships. The tragic story left a lasting impact on those who had known Ryan and on the community as a whole. As Vanessa sat behind bars, the world outside moved on. The wealth and power she had once relied on to keep Ryan by her side were gone, and all that remained was the cold reality of her actions. The obsession that had driven her to kill had not only destroyed Ryan's life, but her own as well. The story of Vanessa Parker and Ryan Davis would serve as a reminder for years to come, a story of love turned deadly and the fatal consequences of losing control.